Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. This is how BAMM failed graphically. I made this presentation with the help of Arlo to show how BAMM could have been more effective in its graphical presentation of information. So what defines graphics? This is basically anything that's going to be made by a designer, digital or printed, that has information on it. But this also includes the logo, despite the fact that I was the one who made the BAM logo this year. So with all that being said, that's what we're going to be trying to cover. So let's get into our first subject, which is the journey to lunch. So here's lunch. Dining hall's way over there. Kirchhoff Center's here. Clothing swap's in that corner. We have a pathway that we have to take. Obviously, that's a pretty long pathway. But along the way, we got to walk through the tundra that was winter. This little graphical representation actually did have a map of what it looked like in winter. Don't know why, but it did. Anyways, it was cold. It was a long walk. And we can't control the weather, but just for reference, the drive up was around 16 degrees that day. And then at the time of the walk, the sun was out. It was 28. It was pretty nice for me, I'd say. I enjoyed it, but I'm not everyone. The idea with the golf cart was that it was going to reduce the travel time for those with mobility issues. However, this was not very communicated. So a lot of people went without the knowledge that the golf cart was present. And we'll get into the golf cart a little bit later. But as you can see, it's a 7-minute walk if you have a normal walking speed, but it's a much longer walk if you don't. Anyways, moving on. So to communicate this message of where the dining hall was, there were signs, three signs placed along the path to get to the dining hall. And we're going to spend some time talking about the thought behind these signs, why they're representative of some of the issues that I kind of seen, and how they're representative of the larger issue.
No amount of smiling at a flight of stairs has ever made it turn into a ramp. Stella Jane Young. Stella Young was one of the first people to speak about the social model of disability, which is the idea that it is not a person's disability that makes them disabled, it is the society around them. When we create events that are not accessible, that is not at the fault of the people who are disabled, it is at the people who make it. When you create an accessible space, you make it so that people, regardless of disability, have access.
Thank you, Arlo. So one of the first ideas about, I guess, the design concept of access is two things: the adaptive access. So you can be like GV, and you can have a space built with access. Those are things like the elevators, ramps, automatic doors, any sort of audio access devices, and they physically have built the space. And then you can do things that add access to the space. This example of a ramp, which is a good example of that, is just they've added a ramp because there wasn't one built into the place. So in this context, Moash attempted to build access into the event. The dining hall was far away. They needed signs to point where things were, or just generally doing the sensory room, things like that, just increased access. And just like a lot of the signage during an event is in a lot of ways doing that. It's making it simpler for people to know where to go, what information is being told. So let's talk about signage and navigation, because that is the main way Moash practices the use of adaptive access here. We usually have overlooked this during BAM, but it's very important to user experience. So, for example, the signs that we see on our walk towards lunch are white on white. It's a white poster. Now, again, can't control the weather. However, this should have just been thought about at one point. Should we have a white poster? And The title says food. It could have said food, lunch, or dining hall, but instead it just says fresh. But yeah, these are the kind of things that you must think about, and we're going to keep talking about the design of this poster and how it affects people's walk to lunch. So photo 1, we have our introduction to these signs. These are the first signs that is posted about this walk. Signs are the audience that basically see these things have a few expectations that have been set when this gets communicated to them. The signs are white. They're going to be found off the path nearby. They'll have an arrow pointing at a direction to go. They're associated with BAMM, and then the word fresh. Just says the word fresh. I'm also going to be representing these with a black arrow pointing where the sign is actually pointing, and then a green arrow to the direction we want people to go. This next one, this is a good example of how these signs might be misconstrued. At this juncture, there is a sign pointed at the pathway, but we're not 100% sure which way it's actually trying to point us. Now, it might be very simple to say, hey, you can go to, obviously it's pointing to the right here, so take a right. However, we don't know which way the arrow is actually pointing to. Is the direction relative to the sign, relative to the viewer, or relative to the path? Or are they trying to remove options? So if there's a fork in the road, it's telling you to go this way. We just don't know these things because the arrow is just pointing right, and that's all we know. Very nitpicky, but the font also changed on the word fresh. I think it was just written down. I don't know why it was different, but it did. Just consistency. We'll get into that later. Next thing. Universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent as possible, without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Ron Mace. Ron Lawrence Mace was an American architect, product designer, educator, and consultant. He is best known for coining the term universal design and his work on advocating for people with disabilities. Universal design as a concept can be seen as a lot of things, but it's generally making a space for everyone. And one of the important ways to do that is cohesive design. These are products made for a specific purpose, or products made to be recognizably related. So if you have products made for something specific, that they're designed for a certain aspect and have no relation to other products that are made, then they're going to be unique. But if we could have products be recognizably related, you get the benefit of whatever information that has been communicated in the past. So BAMM's 2022 graphics were individually made. They were made for the specific purpose that they are: a sign, presentation, and the pamphlets that we hand out, or the lanyards that are given. There's no cohesive design inside of it. Or if there is, it's not very recognizable. So other examples of things that have been trying to go towards the direction of cohesive design are some of the things that I've done for Moash. The brand guide, for example, was something that I was commissioned to make and was made, and Moash has access to, that has guidance on how to utilize font in public spaces, very accessible fonts, what proportions you should be doing with your letters to make sure it's still readable, where should we use our fonts to make sure that everything's like easily communicated. And I made these for consistency, accessibility, and functionality, but they were not present at this event. In this photo, we can see a entrance sign posted up in front of this building. With this entrance sign here, you might be misconstrued at thinking that this is associated with Moash, because the font is very similar. It's all caps. It's on a black and white color, and it just says entrance. There are ribbons, but with a little bit of looking, you can kind of tell it's not Moash. However, this does show the importance of being non-generic, which is what we did. We were just black text, white background. It's also, you can examine your space beforehand to see if there's any confusion. It's about communicating with the vendors and then adding extra information when necessary. There could have been a sign posted that said, don't go here. That's like, this isn't Moash. That's allowed, but we didn't have that. There was no signs about that. So people could have been easily misdirected onto this. I talked about responsibilities of the venue. So the venue, GV, is responsible for instructing how the space can be used. That's which doors can be unlocked, where can you access chairs, what lights to be turned off, how to access the projectors, all of these different things. There's like, here's all the ways we can use the space. The planners of the event are responsible for deciding how to use the space, which rooms we're going to use. This room's going to be the sensory room. This is the lobby area. That's for the planner to decide how to do. And then the designer is responsible for communicating how to use the space. However, Moash did not have a designer present for this project. And it was unfortunate because there was a lot of miscommunicated, because the planners were attempting to do the job of a designer. Planners have the idea of the costs that they need to account for, and what's the easiest for them to understand, rather than a user of the space. Anyways, this is good to know for future events. BAMM was responsible for communicating the bathrooms, room locations, the sensory room in general, event space, the pathways to walk on, and the accommodations that were available. However, what occurred was a miscommunication in many of these things. The people's ability to discover a lot of things about the space that they were in was dependent on kind of where they appeared on the route of information and who they talked to. We'll get into more into the information that was disclosed to youth, but we're going to be seeing that BAMM's ability to communicate that was not great. So we would like to see something better in the future. Last photo that is very telling. If you look at this photo, you're going to see a sign posted off to the left, with it being way before a fork in the road. Pathways shoot off into 3 directions. The building in front of us is actually the dining hall that we are trying to go to, but we have to make a decision on how to go. Now, if you look at where the sign is pointing and you took the literal direction of the arrow, it would point you generally to the green arrow's direction. However, it's much easier, because of the past photos that we've seen, to just take the path that you're currently on as this is the correct path, or just keep going this direction. It's also not put anywhere close. It could have been put closer to the blue railings that people want to go. You can't actually go through the back entrance over there, so you could definitely get lost through that way. And it just was not very well thought out in this case, in terms of where should people be going, and trying to think of the logistics of it all. So the solution could be something like this. It's a user-centric, accessible design. In this way, we have a couple solutions. It's just says the word lunch. It's this way, so it's communicating what it's trying to say. There's the BAMM logo. It's so you know it's associated already because your shirt has that logo on it. It also has a QR code with a virtual map of the campus, or a phone number if you get confused. There's also a graphic on there that shows incorrect paths to go on and the correct path indicated by an arrow. This is a good way to communicate this, because it solves a lot of problems within like all of the things that we've seen. It's also not white. It's not being missed by anyone, which will reduce confusion. Design is an enormous privilege, but it is a bigger responsibility. Sinead Berkey. Sinead Berkey is an Irish writer, academic, and disability activist, popular for her TED Talk, Why Design Should Include Everyone. She is the director of consulting organization Tilting the Lens, working to raise the baseline standards in accessibility to design an equitable and accessible world. The reason I include this quote is because it shows that Moash definitely needs to understand the responsibility of their design in graphic design, and the communication of this. And we'll be spending the next while showing why. The pamphlet is a good example of a lot of things that Moash was not able to do appropriately. The pamphlet has a lot of critical information for people during the event, that is communicated other places, but is still one of the critical ways that you need to communicate it. Penny is going to be present to show size reference because the font in this entire document is tiny, which is obviously bad. The welcome page, this statement can be easily overlooked. If we're thinking about youth-centric friendly design, this is a bad example of it. It isn't fun to look at. It's black on white font. It's not doing good because it doesn't have any visual storytelling. It's just going to be not seen. It's also a lot of tone setting for this event, but it's just not going to be read. So group norms are present on the third page. These norms are going to be important for the entire day. The problem with them being on this paper is that they aren't explained at all. They're also, again, overlooked. We're going to say that with everything, that these can be easily ignored. Some of them I also don't recognize. Not that I'm the ultimate authority on these things, but like, I've been with Mosh for a while. If I can't recognize the thing that you're explaining, then there's something going on. The COVID safety will also be addressing inaccurate information in this. The KN95 masks that were provided were way too small for a lot of people. And they did not stretch, despite the fact that what we were told is that they would stretch. And the title for the Take Care of Yourself Today is ableist. It suggests that that you are entirely responsible for your own care for the day, despite the fact that Moash is extremely responsible. We're going to be talking about that more. Anytime a location is stated, there should be a visual or a map or a way to identify it on a map, pictures of the door. These kind of things are just going to be easier in general. Yeah, there's also no visual hierarchy. Group norms are put before COVID safety and take care of yourself. Debatably, a lot of this information could be put up, or there could be visual distinctions between a lot of it. So just need to keep that in mind. The schedule section. I was not actually using the schedule throughout the day because I was only at one event. So it's important, though, for people that are going to be attending things that you need to label what each of these sections are. For example, the room numbers are not actually labeled. Those are just numbers that are put there. There's no heading on those. Also, if we go to this lower paragraph, we can see that there's a statement saying that doors will be clearly labeled when clearly is extremely debatable. The signage for events were small. I had people often asking me where things were, despite the fact that I did not know. And if that was going to be information I should know, we did not have an incredible amount of information told to us about these things. So the entire day, there's just a lot of questions towards volunteers that did not know this information. One of the other important things that says is that it mentions the golf cart available as a accessibility thing. But the golf cart also had no distinctions if you could hold mobility aids on there, when it would be running, where I could pick it up. It's just not feasible. It also says a short walk away from Kirchhoff, and short walk is again relative to someone who is walking at a normal walking speed. But to those who can't walk at a normal walking speed, then it's not very short. Moving on. Page 6 is resources. I stated this previously, that you cannot click on links on pieces of paper. This is known, and this is where the zine comes in. There's a digital zine that you can check out that has this entire page. That's why I think that there's a lot of graphical issues with this on this paper, is because it's trying to translate from the zine. But this is just a great place to see that this probably shouldn't work like this. There is even a QR code present, which QR codes were used during the event. I don't know how well, but they were used. A lot of those links could have been replaced with a link tree, just going to social medias and such, because no one is going to sit down and type down a social media, not usually at least, but things like this definitely need to not happen. There is value on having written information like this, but this just doesn't seem like the place to do it. The 7th page was dedicated to GVSU centers. I had no experience with this. I've worked with GVSUs and their various centers in the past, but generally, I just don't know why it needs to be there. if it was a requirement from GVSU that it be present, that's fine. But if we're trying to maximize this pamphlet and everything we can get out of it, I don't know why a youth-centric event would be focused on these centers that they might not even attend for 7 years. And they might not even go to GVSU. And these centers might look a lot different in the future. So it feels odd to have to that be the explanation. But if that's what GVSU wanted, I guess I understand the requirement, but this could have been used for a map of the venue, how to get to certain spaces, any other important information could have been present here if we're worried about paper size. Last page. This was the rest of the information. A lot of credits went here, including my credit for the logo. I had said in my email that I had two versions of the credits that I wanted. One was the one where there was a link towards my Behance page to show my previous work, and the other one was to just state what I've made in the past, and where they could locate me, but not as a link. That was not present. I did get a response on the email saying that they probably wouldn't do it, but this is a great example of why I don't want that, because people won't click that. A lot of times links, if you even write them, they're overlooked by people's eyes because they know that the information isn't relevant to them. A very small thing is that since the logos at the bottom are in color on the zine, in here they are black and white, which makes a lot of them look faded and just looks inconsistent. So just wanted to state that. Next thing, Moash has done better before at making informational pamphlets. In 2020, we made the condom usage pamphlet, and it was a collaboration between me and My Voice. It was a great opportunity to hand out. We were super happy with it. We haven't done a whole ton with the thing yet. I took basically design and ran with it to do more. So what I ended up doing was creating a condom dispensing organization on my college campus. So this isn't Moash related anymore, but it's based on the same kind of structure and idea. So this has youth-centric design, more specific to my university's branding, but a lot of the information here is super helpful, and the base is still what we've worked on before, and showing that you are able to do these kind of things. Information can be reduced down and told to people. So it is possible. Also, thank you to Devin for helping me out with that. So I want to talk about the logo briefly. We're mostly here to talk about the kind of event organizing things, but I did want to talk about how the logo was created. So someone had posted in the Slack that we could submit logos for the event. And I was like, oh, cool, sweet. I'd love to submit a logo. I don't remember them doing that in the past. I think there was an open chat message before, but this was like a form. So I submitted like my logos. I care about BAMM a lot. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to other people. So for BAMM not to have like a good looking logo that people would want to wear on a shirt would hurt me. I just don't. I would like to feel proud of this event and continue to have it on my person. However, what actually occurred was not great, because the form that was sent out obviously did not have any statement saying that there would be any form of compensation. It was entirely voluntary. I made 9 logos because I didn't want the opportunity for Moash to go without a logo. If there were other submissions, that's fine. I just want there to be options. There's also no direction on the aesthetics, the topics trying to address, the colors. The only information relevant to it was what information has to be on the logo, as well as be single color. And that's fine. And I tried taking creative liberties, but that's as far as I got. And you were happy with this logo. Then I was asked to make alterations, to which point I said, I think we should enter into a graphic design contract in this case, if we're going to be commissioning me as an artist for the event to do more work. That's up to you. And then Moash chose not to. Overall, this logo is not very good. I'm going to be honest. I know I made it, but I made this very quickly, just so I could meet the submission deadline. It's a mask in reference to the fact that this is a masked event. It's also the first in-person one since 2020. So I decided to reference masks, I guess. Overall, letter spacing is poor. It makes words kind of into just a jumbled mess. BAMM as an acronym isn't really seen that well because the font that's chosen was a all caps font. So 2020 could have been moved down. But otherwise, the fun aesthetic of it is very nice, I guess. But in its usage, it was definitely disappointing to see a purple shirt. Purple's a fine color, but it is barely readable on this purple shirt. So I just, and like I was told in the moment, the reason that they did purple is because, they kept the black colors because it would cost extra to do a white or lighter version. But I don't see a reason why you can't just get a different color or a lighter thing. There's no requirement for purple to be a color. So it was just weird. Seemed like that there's just low vendor communications in that case, which we've seen from Moash in the past with things like all the act shirt having a weird gradient effect. Things like that are just very exemplary.
Something else to mention about this is when we decide to not pay people, which we'll get onto that in another slide, for their work, this is what we get. This is not to say that this is the worst design ever, but it is to say that it is worth it to pay people for their work. And when we do that, we can have even better designs that serve youth, that are accessible, and that are really nice. This is a cool design. I don't dislike it, but there could have been so many more great options made. Black on purple is very difficult to read. We should care about that because there are people who want to have this item and they can't read it. We should also care about that because as the person who created it, May, should have some sort of creative design choices. Not all of it, obviously. She submitted the design on her own. But when we want to create good products, we should be consulting the people who create them. Speaking of pay, we need to go in to BAMM not being a paid event. That's a problem, like a big one. Not only do you expect youth to work for you for free, which is unacceptable, you also expect them to do a certain amount of work voluntarily that is equivalent to actual working. If people are going to be doing heavy lifting, if people are going to be the point person for where things are because they're not clearly communicated, that is paid work. People get paid to do those things. If BAMM is volunteer, that's okay. You need to clearly communicate to us what is volunteer because you don't get to decide what people give just because you're telling them it's a volunteer event. Volunteer event means we voluntarily do certain things for you. It does not mean that we do free labor because you don't want to pay us, you can't pay us, whatever. If you can't pay us, you need to rework the budget. If you don't want to pay us, we don't have to be there. It's very nice to have BAMM. It's nice to create a space, and people want to create that space. And people will do it without being paid. But you have to give the expectation that if we're doing volunteer work, we're doing volunteer things. Does that mean setting up the clothing closet? Sure. But the capacity at which we do that needs to be communicated so that we are not overworking ourselves in an environment which we are expected to simply volunteer. Also, again, when you get art from someone, whether or not you made it clear that they were going to be paid, when you ask for more work, you pay for that work because they are willing to do a job in which they are supposed to be paid. This is supposed to be Moash's whole brand, paying youth. And since BAMM is connected to Moash, we want you to pay youth for their work. That's what you're supposed to be doing. Please. So now we're going to talk about the harm that was done. When we make events without consulting the people that they're for or getting any other outside help, we end up hurting people. Some issues that happen were with joint pain, dislocated hip, exhaustion, sensory overload, malnutrition, and less participation. When we talk about the issue with malnutrition, there were people who weren't able to get to lunch because they couldn't get there due to the distance of the walk. It was confusing with all the signage, like we talked about earlier in the presentation, and there simply wasn't enough time. It is completely fine that we wanted to rotate lunches to reduce the amount of people that were in there, but there still ended up being quite a bit of people in there at one time with their masks off and eating. And especially since we wanted to make this an accessible event, wanted to make this as safe as possible, the fact that we were all put into this dining room without an option after it was said we were supposed to have a grab and go option is concerning, considering the fact that we say we want to be safe and that was not safe. Another point is yes, we did have the sensory room, but if we had to even put in situations like eating in the buffet style lunchroom, what were we going to do about that? We just had to sit there, eat our food, and deal with that sensory overload. And again, the journey to lunch was difficult. Just because most people, or you assume most people, can make that walk, doesn't mean that it's accessible. As a matter of fact, it wasn't. There were youth there who were concerned about going over the bridge because it was a height and they're afraid of heights. There were youth there who had mobility aids. There are people everywhere who have invisible disabilities, and you shouldn't make events just thinking about them. You should be making events accessible just because you can and you should. People may not have a wheelchair, people may not have a walker, but people may deal with pain and other issues that you can't see, and you need to account for them because they matter. And if you want to make sure people know they matter, you make sure you don't cause this harm by giving accessibility. In this next part, we're going to talk about compounding harm. In the previous slide, we talked about individual issues that cause problems for individuals or for groups. But when we talk about compounding harm, we're going to look at all these issues together, starting with graphics. When we have graphics at an event that are visually inaccessible, we are essentially keeping people away from vital information. That information could be where the bathrooms are and if they're gender neutral, or which gender they are assigned to. That could be which way on the path we need to go to get to food. That could be the fact that food has to be walked to quite a distance. At any case, when we are talking about all of these issues, it's not just about one thing that happened to one person or a couple of things that happened to these other people. We need to realize how we create our events and continue to curate them to make sure they're accessible. Let's talk about the pamphlet, for instance. One thing that could have been done is to make sure that we highlighted the pamphlet as a point of information, making sure we told people that all the information they could need potentially was in there. By not doing that, you're not giving anybody the option or the ability to reference something to try to figure out what they need to do or where they need to go. Another thing we need to talk about is the fact that any changes that happen to the event need to be communicated. If we go into an event thinking that, lunch is going to be in the same building, lunch is going to look a certain way, or transportation between buildings is going to look a certain way, and that changes, it is your responsibility to communicate that to youth and to volunteers so they know how to help youth. When we as volunteers are put to task of fixing your problems, we are now not only working for this event, but we are also putting on more work in order to make sure that youth get what they need. And that's not fair. We should not have to do the work that you should have already done if you had considered us to begin with. If you care about us, you care about making sure our voices are heard, you do that by creating an event in which we don't have to put out any more work because you didn't do what you needed to do. It's unacceptable to think that we can just deal with it. It'll be fine because the volunteers will just tell people where they need to go. You need to tell people where to go. This is an event for all people, all youth. So we need to make sure that while they can have questions, they can need some help. That's totally fine. That we can do the most that we can to make sure that they have access to this information. And that starts with our visuals, making sure our pamphlet is interesting and full of the information, making sure that our signs are clear. This is important so that people don't have to unexpectedly walk and injure themselves. I myself am now dealing with injury because I didn't know I was going to have to walk so far now. I don't have an average walking speed. It didn't take me 7 minutes to get there. Probably took me closer to like 10, 15. That's important because we don't want to hurt people and we don't want to have to keep fixing harm. It's not our job to do that. It's our job to create more valuable spaces for youth. And we can't do that if we keep having to repeat the same message of, please make this accessible. Please make this accessible. Do you know if it's wheelchair friendly? This is your job and your responsibility. We'll work with you when it's necessary, but you need to start doing your job.
Now, why did this happen? There's a lot of excuses that can be brought to us, and any other statement about the unexpectedness of event organizing. But the truth is that Moash has been doing this for a long time, and they talked to us beforehand. The variables of this event range from time, direction, cost, and expertise. Time is that design was not a priority, or accessibility was not a priority when it came time, or the accessibility of the designs. The direction about designs, decisions are just not made about how these designs should be communicated. Designs were just made and there was no decision behind them. Cost, it could be seen as being too expensive to have good design. But in this case, then it's just too expensive to have access. In which case, great. Moash is no longer an accessible organization. Expertise, the voices of the people that have these needs were not present in this planning experience. Devin, who's the accessibility coordinator of Moash, it is not his job to police every piece of inaccessibility you have. While he is definitely an expert in this field, he is not these people. And he does not know on the day of what people's experience are going to be like. He's not here, but it should be stated that a lot of my Access members did not really leave the clothing space, since we knew that there were going to be accessibility challenges in other spaces. So in this way, expertise of those voices not being present caused us to be kind of isolated in that area.
Now we have to ask ourselves, or you can ask yourselves, have we stayed true to our apology? On the right side of the screen, the apology says, Moash representatives on the BAMM Pride Summit Planning Committee would like to offer an apology to the members of the disabled LGBTQIA+ youth community. And at the bottom, it says, also in bold, we will use this experience to inform how we approach programming through a disability justice lens going forward. But we still don't think you have. My Access had a conversation with the BAMM Pride's Planning Committee about access issues, about why having a digital option or an online portion to BAMM was necessary and important, but also why in-person events need to be accessible. Again, Devin is the access coordinator for Moash, has given many outlines on how to make an event accessible, and yet it still fell short because disabled youth was not considered. For instance, had I known I would have to walk around BAMM, I probably would have done things a little bit differently. I didn't necessarily have a mobility aid when I started, but now I deal with this. This is a cane. I'm using a cane because I've been experiencing pretty intense back pain since BAMM ended. Now, is it completely BAMM's fault? Debatable. But because I was not able to put my body first because of the lack of information that I was given, I was harmed in a physical way. Some people were harmed psychologically and physically. Knowing when and where I can use my energy is essential to make sure that I don't get hurt. And it's also essential for every other person attending this event, youth or not. So when you say you're going to approach programming through a disability justice lens, what do you think that means? It should mean that we're going to create events that do not cause harm as much as we can. And we're going to create events that when harm is caused, we hold ourselves accountable. We are here because we've heard nothing from you. And you've had to know with our complaints while we were there at the event and perhaps a little bit after that you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And it's not just about us being disappointed or sad that BAMM wasn't accessible. This is also about myself and potentially other youth who were harmed and have to deal with those repercussions. I won't know until later on what I'll have to do, but now I'm going to have to put extra care that I probably wouldn't have if I had known the kind of physical exertion I was going to put myself under. I'm just one living example of what this kind of harm can do to a person, especially someone who, I mean, maybe not the most able bodied, but mostly. And this is why it's important because when we want to have access, we're not listened to.
Moash should use this experience to inform how we approach programming through a disability justice lens going forward. Hire a graphic designer that has experience with BAMM, Moash, and accessible design and is a YAC member to Moash staff. You should be hiring me.
And no questions. A response is not asked for. We don't just want to be heard, we want to be listened to.